Hello and welcome to Next 2.0 on WQLN PBS NPR. Next is produced by the Public's Voice Media. I am your host, Marcus Atkinson. If you want to know more about Next 2.0, you can go to Facebook and like the page. You can follow us on Instagram at Next 2.0 Erie. There you can keep up with upcoming show promos, events, and clips about what's next for our communities and our democracy. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am a part of a very special effort here in Erie, Pennsylvania. And well, first of all, it is an outpouring of 100 Black Men of America. We've got a local chapter here. And we do a fatherhood fellowship once a month. And the purpose of this is just as it states. It's a fellowship where we all come together, we share, we laugh, we kind of give each other our own stories, and we hope to learn from each other and encourage one another. And it's a good thing. It's not the only meeting of its kind here in Erie. I've gone to several others that have come out, that have played out in a very similar fashion. Some have larger groups than others. But what has happened over time, and I don't think this is the goal of organizers per se, but you end up with all of these different accounts floating around where it's almost as if it's a competition on who's going to reach more fathers. And no, we don't go to that group, we go to this group. No, that group is full of this type of father. This group is full of this type of father. And the last time we had our meeting, our special guest today, Dr. Paris Baker. And first of all, Dr. Baker, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
All right. The last time we had our meeting, Dr. Baker, you made the statement that you talked about the diversity of fatherhood and the need for all of these different types of groups. And that is kind of the catalyst of this conversation, if you will, because we have an upcoming event that I want to talk about as well for Father's Day, and it's going to be at Second Baptist Church, and I know that you're the keynote speaker, but I think leading into that event, that conversation, I wanted to give Greater Erie a snapshot of that conversation so that we can hopefully start breaking down walls and help other people understand and have a better understanding and appreciation ourselves for the fact that it takes a village, as cliche as that sounds. And fatherhood is one of those topics where it's too big to fail, and that's in a literal sense. And so, first of all, give us your background on this whole idea of fatherhood and the history of it.
Well, again, glad to be here, and let's just dive into it. The history of fatherhood is kind of diverse in and of itself, in that fatherhood in the United States, in the inception of our nation, has a different way of thinking about fatherhood than in, for example, in the Roman Empire. So we have many different iterations of fatherhood. The bottom line to it, though, is whether we're talking about Greek, Roman, Northern European, African, or in the United States, fatherhood is absolutely important, quintessential to families. And so what we need to focus on, I believe, is the whole nature and substance of fathering. What does that mean? What does it mean for a man to be a father, which is a different role identity than brother or uncle, or what have you, and how we're socialized, how our identity is shaped by how we think about fathering. In America, interesting enough, the role of fatherhood, if you went back and looked in the literature, you won't find a lot of attention to it. To father. It was missed by social scientists. It was just a given that men are husbands and fathers. We work, we take care of the family by providing economic provision to take care of the people who are in the household, and disciplinarians. And that was kind of it. If you had a trade, then you were a mentor to someone. You trained your sons to take over the business, but it was kind of limited. As we go through, now we're getting to the 50s, 60s. And if you go back and watch the black and whites, you'll see Ozzie and Harriet and Leave It to Beaver and all those. It was kind of makeshift identities. Yeah. And by the way, there were no fathers of color in any of those pictures. And so how we think about fathering is racially dictated. Again, if we go backwards and think about slavery and the identity of fathers, Black men could not perform some of the duties that a father characteristically had or was expected to do in his role as a father. And so we get to around 1970, in the 70s, when the United States started paying much more attention to fathering. The reason for that is we didn't as much focus on fathering as we did absent fatherhood, which is different.
Mm,
Yeah. Um, and roughly the mid 1970s, 74, 75, with the Federal Office of Child Support Enforcement, because the federal government began to recognize as the government became the surrogate father of families, that the government was taking care of women and children
mm,
through welfare. And so the government said, we are not in that business. And so we're going to collect child support. And we had a federal office and state offices around 1975.
and so,
Fast
Doc,
forward.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm trying to get right to where we're at now. Fast forward, we figured out how to get child support. So from the 70s to about the 90s, fatherhood was a major, major issue, but it was father absence. If you look at it, look at the literature, it's always what are the correlates of father absence to families, to anything related to kids? It's always negative. Then we get to 2003, 2004. We figured out how to get child support without the participation of the man. We just take it. We garnish wages, take away license, blah, 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 blah. And then once again, fatherhood fell off the map. That gets us to this particular point now.
Mm,
Again, there's kind of a rethinking of fatherhood. And that's why I'm really excited about where we're going and where you're going with the
hmm
issue of fatherhood.
So I think most people that know you or that have heard of you understand you to be a college professor, right? You mentioned
Mhm.
Dr. Baker. That's an A.D. associate that began and so on and so forth. But where fatherhood is concerned in particular, as it, coincides with your educational pursuits, talk about that because I don't think a lot of people know what your credentials are when it comes to fatherhood educationally.
Right. So, most people, and it's kind of an interesting anomaly here. Most people who study fathering, have an issue with their natural father, and I'm no exception to that. The interesting kind of caveat here is most researchers are female. Probably 75 to 80% of all the research, if you went back and just look at the authors, principal investigators, they're female. Again,
Mm,
it's not, because there's not a lot of money associated with the research in fathering. And that's one of the ways I explain that. Anyway, I grew up like a lot of people with a loving father who was a tyrant. He was a tyrant. He only loved us the way he knew how in terms of the family construct. He grew up in the South, and it was that what I mentioned earlier. Fathers do the following: I bring home the bacon, I discipline you, and then I go do my thing. And so along with my brother, but specifically to me, I needed a father who was more nurturing, more touching, that kind of thing. And so when I got through college, undergrad again, and I was working at Percy's house, and I met a young man, Demetrius. Street name is Coke, and wow, I really fell in love with this young man. And somewhere in there, he got through the program and graduated, became friends, and I said, let me help you with other things. And he said, Paris, I wasn't Dr. Baker then, Mr. Baker, because he's really respectful. I'm not going to live to be 21, selling dope and doing all this stuff. And I like all that. And sure enough, he was shot in the face twice um, at 19. And I
yeah.
went, whoa, what happened? And so that launched me into this study of fathering. Now, I had some major issues with God, trying to figure out the whole spirituality of fathering with my own natural father. But I started academically focusing on fatherhood in 1995, and it was some of that motivation, like what could I have done differently? I think he was killed, I think, in 96, but it was our relationship, what was developing. Anyway, fast forward, I went to University of Pittsburgh, got a PhD in fathering. That's how committed I was to the issue, is I just really wanted to know. And what I discovered is the more I learned, the more I didn't know about fathering. It's just
hmm
one of those things that's so deep. And we tend to think about fathering like really superficially, like just because you as we some kids say sperm donor, that you created the DNA to create me, does not make you my father. um there's something unique, and I really believe that the idea of fathering is spiritual before it's social.
hmm
And we can talk about that as we get into it, but there is something very unique. And if you think about, and you have children, I have children,
hmm
When you had a male son, from the time he was born, what kind of toys did you give him?
Things that were male centric, guns
Absolutely,
and, uniforms for superheroes, and so on and so forth.
absolutely. And so from the beginning, most young men are not socialized to be fathers. It's just a missing link. We give girls dolls and ovens, Susie bake ovens or whatever they call. We do all that stuff, right?
Very true.
Dudes get trucks and guns, as you said. And so why are we not surprised 15, 20 years later that fatherhood is missing? And what men say is, I don't know how to be a father. Why? Because I grew up a lot of times with a father who didn't know how to father me, how to teach me the skills to be a father. And everything that in my education directed me to be aggressive and to make money and to do all that kind of stuff. So what we're doing again is important to kind of fill in the gaps and help men understand how important this role is as father. And so I've done some fathering programs, developed a few things along the way, 30, 40 years of studying fathering. And so while I'm not necessarily a content expert, I think I know it as much as the next person.
So when I was growing up, I had my own personal circumstances that I won't go too deep into right now, but I found myself very interested in the topic because the one thing I was convicted of is this isn't the way this is supposed to play out. I had two different men in my life. My father and my dad, and on both fronts, love them both, but on both fronts, I felt like this is not how this is supposed to play out. And so I looked at three fathers on television who kind of were an amalgamation of what I thought an ideal father was. And one was Ward Cleaver, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other was Charles Ingalls, and the other one was Cliff Huxtable. And so as I looked at these three fathers, I just always found myself, fantasizing about, well, what is this supposed to be like? And what type of father will I be? Do you find for a lot of not just boys, but men, because I do find that this issue, if it is unfulfilled, it carries over into well into adult years. But do you
Mm-hmm.
find a lot of men kind of fantasizing about what they were supposed to have, or what this thing should have played out like, or what even they should be like? Because society does not do a good job of saying this is what it looks like in real time.
Yeah, lots of men arrive at different stations in life, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. I'm just using decades. And then kind of turn around and do a revisit. Who am I and am I successful in a lot of different categories, employment, father or family and fathering, those kind of things. And we tend to evaluate fathering from exterior criteria.
Yeah,
Is if I'm doing A, B, and C, that makes me a good father. In fact, the definition from the federal government, which is kind of an interesting definition, responsible fathering is the man who financially cares for his child or children, is the
mm.
primary definition. And that's, again, that's very narrow
And it's
because
very
I
reductive.
absolutely.
Yeah,
And so a lot of men who if that's the criteria, that's the low bar I have to hit, then I'm paying the bills, but I can be absent in everything else.
yeah,
Okay. And so when we try to think about different men try to think about fathering, most men are at middle class and below. Okay. And so it's always, what could I have done better? How
right.
could I have done A, B, and C differently, as opposed to the successes that they probably have had with their children? Because the children are the barometer for good fathering, and we need to pay attention to the children. Children would rather have the man in their life than to have all the stuff he can buy. And that's
Hmm.
really important for men to get. It's a hard nut to crack. Um, and that gets us into, one of your objectives here. There are so many different kinds of fathers. And because we have such a narrow strip to develop an identity for fathers, we miss that fathering is biological. It can also be adoptive. It could be stepfathering. It could be social fathering. It could be a coach. It could be a youth pastor, what have you. There are lots of men who come into the lives of our children, school teachers, although there are fewer males at the elementary and middle school level. But nonetheless, and each one of us need to understand when a child comes into my life, part of my identity as a man, whatever I'm doing, coach or music band director, whatever, this is a part of me that takes supervision of that child. And in that idea of I have supervision, I am actually fathering this child for the next hour or 6 hours or what have you. And we need to have a different template
Hmm.
for how we think about fathering. It's really important. And again, I go back to the social data. When you look at absent fathers, which we can talk about this. There's no such thing as an absent father. Ask a child. You're just physically not here, but you're
Yeah.
present. I can feel your absence, and so yeah, you're present. But there's so many, whether we're talking biological, poor health, low birth weight, obesity, mental health issues, or we're talking economic poverty, things that are connected. Those correlates are all negative, but associated with fathers who are not present. So we
Hmm.
really do need to take a different look, to have a different lens to look at this important issue. And again, I go back to whether we're looking kind of culturally, the importance of fathering. In many traditions, you find that the role of the father is quintessential, like the center of that community. Okay, sometimes there's a matriarchal division of labor, and so you have both parents operating, doing different things. Um, but the role of the father is always important in most cultures.
Hmm. And so, from a cultural perspective, obviously, fatherhood has its own barriers or trials, tribulations, and triumphs, for that matter, in every demographic. But let's talk
Mhm.
specifically about the African American community, Black folk, if you will.
Mhm.
Let's
Yes,
go
sir.
back. Let's go back and kind of layer in the history of African Americans in this country and all of the things that come along with that. How does that intersect with fatherhood, and what effects or what side effects have come forth just from those unique touch points in that journey?
Yeah, there's some great work done by a researcher, Willie Jennings. If you want to do some background on this, he said something that's really important. He wrote a lot of stuff, but there's a couple things that he said I pay attention to. One is Black men, Negroes, if you will, in America did not have control of any aspect of their environment. The ecology of a Black man was absolutely controlled by white men. And so if you just think about that, what is fathering? You go through the criteria that Black men could not actualize, could not participate in. Father as protector, father as provider. I can't do any of that. And it wasn't until we got past the civil rights that you find Black men taking a different role in fathering. I'll give you an example. Again, we're going to talk about Black folks. You and I probably grew up in kind of the same environment. I always found it strange how Black men discipline their children. They discipline their children like the oppressor. I thought that was very
Mm.
strange. Yeah, that why would you discipline me with an extension cord? Why are you whipping me like this? As if you hate me, you know? Just really strange. And I found that that was across the South, that this idea is I'm going to provide as much as I can for you. And I know my father loved me. I don't want people to take that the wrong way. My father was operating in the culture that he grew up in, but there were a lot of things that he thought about in terms of teaching me something that was connected to the oppression that he was experiencing. My father's from Laurel, Mississippi,
Hmm.
and so for example, I grew up. I was born in '57. My father was born in '33. He grew up in the Mississippi, where one of the major issues in a South riddled with racism of Emmett Till.
Hmm.
And so when I was a teenager, my dad said, "If I ever hear of you dating a white woman," and he meant this, Marcus, "I will kill you." I said, "That is the strangest thing I heard. You're trying to convey that you love me, but you're going to kill me." It
Yeah.
wasn't until it wasn't until I went back. Now I'm an adult. I went back and said, "Dad, can we talk about this? Why did you say that?" He said, "Because I did not ever want a white man to put his hands on you. So I was trying to drive fear into you so
Yeah.
that you would never put yourself in that position. If anyone was going to kill you, it was going to be me, but not because I hated you. It's because I loved you." I said, "Dad, how come you couldn't say that?" He didn't know how
You
to
didn't
say it.
know. Right.
Just didn't know. Yeah,
But
so it was growing up in environments like that. So yeah, again, if you could go back and look at the black and white film, "I Am a Man," and people are,
yes.
why do you need to have a statement Come on. I, I don't know how to turn this off, so forgive me. Um, yeah, so the signs. It was important for identity because I'm a boy, the N word, I'm blah, 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 blah. And having grown up for centuries with that kind of um, identification from white men and in our own communities, men began saying it's important that I redefine or define myself. And a lot of that was connected to employment, getting
Mm-hmm.
jobs. And so, there's no hardly any literature on African American fathering other than we're hypersexual, we're absent, we're blah, 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 all that negative stuff. But Black fathers are beautiful, and we need to help um, the world understand
Mm-hmm.
the critical role of fathering in a Black community, in Black families. And by the way, let me just be clear. I'm not saying Blackness as a color, okay? I'm saying Blackness as a cultural component,
Mm-hmm.
understanding our culture and embracing our culture. So if you think about the concept of Blackness, being Black, again, if you ask people, would you rather be born Black or white? Particularly in the
Mm-hmm.
60s, well, people say, I want to be white. Why? Because being Black, you got all these challenges. Well,
Yeah.
that's just conceptual, okay? And so how we think about color is important. So we can be a different color and still teach about Blackness.
Mm-hmm. As black men traditionally, and this was the countenance or the disposition of my grandfather, of my
Mm.
dad's, and my great grandfather, who I had the privilege of getting to know, to
Uh-huh.
disrespect a black man, a black father, a black grandfather, was drawing a hard line in the sand, and it was met with zero tolerance. I mean, big zero, hard zero tolerance.
Yes.
Everything that
Tantamount
you,
to suicide.
yes, yes. And so I listened to everything that you're saying about these black men coming from these completely controlled environments back in the day, and how that shaped oftentimes the way they lorded over their households or the way they fathered their children. Can you speak a little deeper about that term disrespect and just the way, not just black men, but black fathers and grandfathers, the way black men in these roles react to being disrespected, especially in their home? Give us the social context of that,
Well,
or the
again, if we go,
cultural context of that. I'm sorry.
yeah, if we go back to my whole ecology is controlled by white men, there's two places that I can illustrate authority. One is my home, and one is church.
That's right.
White men don't come in church, and so if you think about church, although again in the development of our different communities and various communities, women were predominantly the caregivers in church. Who was in charge? The deacons, the pastor. And we use scripture to actually say we're going to keep women out of those leadership roles because the Bible says. And in those roles, men were authoritarians. What I say goes, it's not to be challenged. Um, I do not, I'm going to cut you. I wish I knew how to cut that off. Um, and this person really wants me. This is the third or fourth call. I hope
Yeah,
it's not.
whatever it is, it's not affected over here. I don't see
Okay.
anything. I don't. You're
Okay.
coming through clearly. You're fine over here.
Okay. Great. Great. Then I won't worry about it again because this is the third or fourth call. And I got my phone right here. So, and on my voice message says, use my cell number because I don't answer this phone. I mean, truly, that's what it says. Anyway, back to this.
Two
So
areas:
it,
home and
it
church.
yeah, I segue too quickly to home. Again, I don't want to beat up on some very simple criteria, but um, just imagine how resilient you would have to be to work 10, 12, 15 hours a day
Hmm.
doing this manual labor. So I'm being called the N word forever and boy this and blah, 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 that, and so on and so forth. And then come home. What's my esteem? How do I illustrate going from a boy to a man, literally
Right.
by walking from where I was at the field or whatever into home? And so, although most of the times inappropriately demonstrated, I'm in control. Now, just part of that is because I have not been in control
Hmm.
for the whole day.
Hmm.
And so I'm not going to tolerate this. I'm not going to blah, 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 blah. because we didn't have language skills.
Right.
Express. We weren't taught it is okay for you to feel all this stuff and how you express it. There are lots of ways to express it. Again, it's not surprising that men in these different roles have hypertension and all kind of cardiovascular issues because we've stuffed all that stuff away and passed it on from one generation to the next.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And so again, I'm never surprised with all the linkages to poor biology outcomes
Hmm.
because we just lived in an environment of stress. Here's
Right.
the other thing, Marcus, that's real important. And most people do not get this. Imagine, how old are you? 50 something?
55. Double
55.
nickel. Yep.
There you go. All right. Imagine you at 55
Hmm.
walking out of your home and recognizing that the social and legal, in some states, the legal right of a child could tell you what to do at the drop of a hat. That you would have to be subservient, lower your eyes, that you couldn't say anything or do anything to this child, a white child.
Hmm.
Uh, what that would do to your esteem and to how you think about your
I'm
role as a man.
sure.
Yeah. And then you, again, going back home or going to church, Dr. Cone, James Cone, who is one of the founders of Black Liberation Theology, actually makes that point very, very clearly. And that's why when we go to church, we do a lot of shouting and that there's a lot of emotion because that's where you could be free. That's like all the
Right.
pain and suffering that I had through the whole week, I could release it in church.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah. And why sermons are so long. I got to say everything today, right now,
Right. Right.
because I won't get to do it till next Sunday.
Okay, so I don't want to steal your thunder because I want people to come out for this men's conference, and it's going to be Saturday, June 14th. I'll give all the relevant information at the end of this interview. And so I don't want to steal all of your information, but I do want to touch on the issue in hand. And one of the things that I started this conversation with, and that is this idea of no, we're going to do this group here because these fathers fall into, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong. I am
Right.
posing the question. We're gonna deal with this group of fathers over here, and we're gonna gather together because we all come from a similar profile, and we're not gonna go and sit in this group over there because they're of a different profile, educationally, occupationally, the list
Hmm.
goes on, and um, and then maybe we'll come together once or twice a year if we come together at all. That tribal
Yep.
approach to fatherhood. Can you speak to how beneficial it if so or detrimental? Speak to the effects of that on us trying to create this healthy community of fathers so that we can, as you talked about earlier, passing things down by generation so that we can pass this healthy outlook on fatherhood down to the next generation. What does this tribalism do to that process?
Yeah, it undermines everything. Let me just say it is quintessentially destructive. It it is something we need to dismember as quickly as possible. And part of that is I'm going out on a limb making some specific statements about something that could be generalized. Okay, because every personality is different. But what I tend to find is, and you said the word tribalism, which is what I agree. If I talk to, let me go back to what I said about where can I exhibit my manhood
Hmm.
in this tribe? This is mine, and you can't come in. This is how I do it because I'm looking for controls. Okay, not recognizing the whole idea of village, that I need every one of us to be working together, rowing in the same direction, if you will, so that we can uplift everyone. And so part of that is just personality quirks, if you will, and limited understanding in what we're trying to do. Again, if I'm talking to those men, I would say this for those from a Christian or believing standpoint. When Jesus Christ um, was baptized, the next thing that happened,
Mm.
people missed the fathering aspect. It said, open, a dove descended, fell on Jesus, and you heard a voice. The father of Jesus said, "This is my son in whom I'm well pleased." The question is, what did he do that was so pleasing to God that he would crack over the sky and talk? He's just my son. You
Yeah.
don't have to do it. He's my son. If you look
Yeah.
at that out the Gospels, you will find that Jesus is just this wonderful son. Why? Because I'm the son of God. But right after, you know what Jesus does? He gets up, I'm baptized, he drives off. And the next thing he does, Marcus, is he finds 12 men because I can't do this alone. I
Got it.
cannot do it alone. And we got to get men to understand that you are
Mm,
not in this alone. And although I'm God, I need your help. And so, and they came from all various backgrounds. Okay. Some, like, we wouldn't pick these dudes at all. They were just crazy. Um, and so it doesn't, your criteria is are you connected to the vision of fathering? Do you want to
yeah.
improve families and communities? If we all can agree on that, then we can roll. But if you have your own agenda for your own tribe, and some of this, a lot of this has to do, again, if you go back to the 60s when we were looking at um, changing the African American communities, a lot of that was connected to who's going to get the money. And one of the things that helped
Yeah.
communities but also hurt us was community block grants, because now we're all competing for a limited amount of money. Okay. And so I can't work with you because you might get the money and where am I at? So it's every man for himself. In fact, Malcolm X said, it's interesting that the oppressor would take one steak, divide it up. I mean, wouldn't divide it up, but would just throw the whole steak into the pit and let the dogs fight over it when he could have cut it up and gave it to each dog. Let them
Hmm.
fight amongst themselves for these scraps, if you will. And
Yeah.
I kind of see that. Is there money associated with fathering programs? It depends because it ebbs and flows. Okay.
Hmm.
But I got the secret sauce, brother Marcus. I know how
Yeah.
to do fathering.
Mm,
And again, not recognizing there are so many different types of fathering. For example, you do not teach fathering to men in prison the same way you would with a middle class father who's in an intact family. You
hmm.
don't; those are two different challenges. And
Right.
so, somebody who's steeped in the understanding of what it means to be a parent in prison, or somebody who's got different struggles in the community.
Yeah.
And so, we need everybody. We
I,
need
I,
everyone.
I want to go after that because along the same vein as the original question, I think
Mhm.
what happens is whether we do this intentionally or unintentionally, there is the syndrome of my black is more authentic that we all tend to fall in. And whether it is this group saying, listen, my black is more authentic because, I got the ear of the street. I'm in the street. I'm in the hood. I'm part of the hood.
Right.
You disconnected from my black is more authentic. This group over here is saying, listen, like Martin and I'm educated, and
Uh-huh.
it's all about uplifting our people educationally. That's the route that I've gone. My black is more
Right.
authentic, right? This person's in
Mhm.
politics for so many different reasons. We find ourselves, and whether we say it overtly or we just continually make statements that kind of
Mhm.
validates the fact that this credential of mine makes me more authentic and the community needs to hear this voice. What do you say to us as black men in terms of the necessity of edifying and validating all of these different experiences and not trying to elevate one over the other?
Yeah. And there is a historical context for that. We say the house
Yes,
and the
and the
field.
field,
Yeah. Yeah. Dark skin, light
light
skin,
skin.
educated, uneducated. This whole chasm between we're all members of the same group. I'm a pass for white, blah, blah, blah. So there's a whole historical context to this understanding. And again, if that's the way you were socialized, don't be surprised what you produce. One of the things that's real interesting, and I take great pride in it, although you can't be humble if you mention it. So there's the humility going out the window, is I don't use the term when I'm dealing with fathers. I never introduce myself as Dr. Baker because once again, it interferes with relationship building.
Hmm.
And so I'm you and you're me, whether I got more education or not. Just read more books, we'll know the same stuff. But what I'm where I'm trying to connect with men is, and you said this earlier, and it's so important, the narratives that we hear the stories, because when I hear your story and you hear my story, you're going to find that we have a lot of things in common and we can help each other. But if we talk about your education and my education, they will be different.
Hmm.
And then somehow I have to defend these different positions. So part of coming together again, and it really, again, I don't want to go too far off topic, but think about building a car on an assembly line. No one person builds a car, right? There might be an owner, but we have specialists who do the tires and do the windows and do the engine and at the end of the assembly line, we got a car or we have a healthy child or a healthy family. That's how we have to get men to think about it. Your piece is one piece in this continuum of building healthy families, elevating the entire community. So don't think that your piece is more important, because I ask people all the time, this is one way of getting people to think about it. What's the most important part of a car? And most people say the engine. It makes sense to me until I say you don't have a key or you don't have any gas or one of your tires are missing, or like all parts are important at a different point in time. And
Yeah.
so let's not try to elevate each other, to try to, like dissing each other to make my church, my pastor, my history, my blackness, whatever, more important than yours. Because
Hmm.
at the end of the day, that's so irrelevant
Yeah.
to the bottom line of where we're going, what we're trying to do. Like, okay, you're better than me. What did we move the needle anywhere? You feel better, but we didn't do anything.
Mm.
So,
And so that sets us up perfectly in terms of the spirit of this men's conference. Let me give you some information about this. This is Impact Erie, Empowerment, Restoration, and Investment and Engagement. And this is a free event. Um,
yes, I love that
and
we changed that.
absolutely, you're the keynote speaker. I
Mm-hmm.
love the fact that you're the keynote speaker because we do have a tendency of always looking towards someone, out of town. Now, a friend of mine was out of town. He's been here to speak before, and it was a name that I put forth. When he couldn't make it, I'm like, well, wait a minute, wait a minute. What's going on with Dr. Baker? This is
Mm-hmm.
his subject, right? And so I'm
Mm-hmm.
glad that you're doing that. And then there's breakout sessions or what have you. And it's at Second Baptist Church, which is the church of Dr. Daryl. I mean, not Dr. Pastor Daryl Cook.
But he's a doc.
Okay, well there you go.
Mhm.
Of
I mean, in our tradition.
There you go. In our tradition. And
Mhm.
this is not a 100 Black Men of Erie event per se. And this is one of the reasons why when I was contacted, I'm like, absolutely. I think it's important for me, and I'll let you speak to this. For me, it's important for all of the men who have these different groups, and I celebrate them all because all of the work is needed. It's important that we all come together just to say that. And the biggest thing for me is to make sure that our children understand that, listen, we have significant issues that we're facing, not just as fathers, but as Black fathers and as Black men. The
Mm-hmm.
last thing we need is for our children to be trying to figure out, my team so and so because he's from the hood, or my team so and so because he's that's ridiculous. And so just
Right.
speak to the importance of us coming together for something like this.
Yeah. Um, and I don't know if you or whoever had any connection to empowerment or engagement, restoration, investment, and empowerment. The Erie, Impact Erie.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that to me was beautiful. That's part of the presentation I'll have, so I'll save that. But Impact Erie. One of the things in 1995 to 2001 that kind of goes under the radar is at that particular time when we're developing programming and doing all types of fathering in Erie. The national average for custodial single parent fathers was 9%. It elevated to 11% in that 5 years. So it went up 2 percentage points. In Erie, it went up to 22%. Now, I cannot empirically say we had something to do with that, but in my heart, I know it, that because of the education that we were giving men across all dimensions and Black fathers specifically, that, and we were meeting with judges and caseworkers and the whole bit. I mean, we spent a lot of time educating people to what we were doing. It changed the narrative completely about fathering in Erie, and it
Hmm.
showed up. It showed up statistically. When we say Impact Erie, I said, "Wow, here it is again." Thank you, God, for this revival of fathering, because I believe this is going to be the starting point for that same kind of um, transition, rethinking fatherhood. And if we can get past the nonsense of competing and work collectively and collaboratively, man, we're going to do some incredible stuff. When we see Black men together, um, unfortunately, it is times of crisis. For
Yeah.
example, whole Black Lives Matter movement brought us together, but what was the crisis? We had to have folks die. Okay, we don't need to have another march, though marches are important. We don't
Hmm.
need that. What we need is what galvanizes us And the major issue is we want to do better as men and fathers in educating the community and our families, again, for this kind of uplift, that we can do better. And one of the areas that really, really important is the idea of investment. Is we do not think critically enough about investment. And again, for me, a lot of what I'm going to is spiritual. It says a righteous man will leave an inheritance for his children's children. So you got to be thinking about two generations.
That's right.
Yeah. So how do you do that? That one statement alone will dictate, do I buy the rims or do I put food on the table? Now, I'm not
Hmm.
against rims. I'm saying if you got a choice, how do you think about it? Well, I'm responsible for A, B, and C. Buy the rims if you want. But if we're thinking about responsible fathering, not in the federal government's definition, but in terms of culture and spiritual stuff,
Hmm.
then I got to take care of the next generation.
Right.
So my involvement with family, how I spend my money, my time, what do I do within the community context, everything. If I just can capture that one sentiment, I'm going to be better, and my community is going to be better. And
Yeah.
Marcus, let me just say this. I keep saying that, and the reason why I'm kind of redundant here, but there's a reason for it. It's because you know, and I think this conference is going to bring attention to that. We separate something that is inseparable, and we do it artificially. We don't get, if I am not present in my community doing A, B, and C, then my community will be hurt. Somehow we believe that if I'm doing my own thing over here, that somehow I'm not hurting my community, right? No, that is
Hmm.
not true.
Right.
It is absolutely essential to start getting in our head. Every one of us is important, and every one of us has to be involved at some level on this continuum, contributing to the uplift and change in our community.
Hmm.
And that's why I just say it over and over and over again until we get it.
Yeah, I've made constant reference to the Malcolm Martin paradigm in my
Hmm.
show over the years, and I know that back in the day, you had a lot of people in community, celebrities included, that were constantly trying to bring Malcolm and Martin together because these were two giants in our communities. And
Hmm.
the way I always spin it is, you can take somebody like Martin, who graduates high school at 14, and then he has his bachelor's degree by 19, and the list goes on. And this man is just accomplished, and you look at Malcolm X, who's a petty thief, and he's a pimp, and he goes to jail and everything else. And when it's all said and done, you can't make a case for the fact that Martin was a greater impact on his community than Malcolm was.
Hmm.
And you can't make a case for the fact that because Malcolm went to prison and he was in the street, that Martin was somehow a sellout because he didn't go that route. It's a nonsensical argument. And yet,
Right,
both of those paradigms still exist in our community. And unfortunately, those two paradigms are still at odds. This Negro ain't real. He ain't never been to jail. He ain't never. Well, does that have to be his narrative for him to be quote unquote real?
right.
Or vice versa?
If we go back to the whole, now we're in the turn of the century, 19 20th century, well, with W.E.B. Du Bois and the Talent of the 10th,
Yes,
right? And Booker T. Washington, got my hand with five fingers. Which one is it? It's both,
it's
but
both.
people wanted to choose.
Yeah,
I'm an elitist. I'm part of the Du Bois movement. I am grounded myself in the trade work. Both are important.
that's right.
Malcolm, what we began to discover, and unfortunately both were assassinated, is they were
Yeah,
coming together on their
they were.
own.
They
They
were.
were coming together. Why? This is important to our conference. It's because they spent more time talking to each other. And the more
Mm,
they talk to each other, the more they recognize we have different methodologies to get to the same place. That's all it is. We have the same goals, but we're using different methodology. And guess what? Some of this methodology differences, they're both needed.
yep.
Okay. It is important to get the attention. I'm not advocating violence, but sometimes protests are important to get people to pay attention to, here's what we're doing. You need both of them. Okay. And again, I guess I use, mechanical illustrations or health illustrations. If you got a PCP and you got a problem with your heart, he or she doesn't try to do it. They send you to a specialist because
Yeah.
that ain't my thing, right? We need everybody
Yes, we
at this
do.
in this game. We do. We
That
need everybody.
that is a wonderful note to end this on. This men's conference is Saturday, June 14th. That is from 1 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. If you want to know more about it, you can call Second Baptist Church, and their number is 814-456-6874. That is Second Baptist Church. Keynote speaker will be Dr. Paris J. Baker. We certainly appreciate your time today, Dr. Baker, man. Thank you so much for coming on, educating us, and hopefully people will come out and join the conference and bring their own experiences to the table.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for our show today. Tune in next week for more discussion and analysis with local and national guests. Remember, the Next 2.0 streams on Fridays on all major podcast platforms and on the fourth Sunday of the month at 4 p.m. on WQLN PBS NPR, which is 91.3 FM. If you want to call and leave a message or a text message to either leave a comment or a suggestion for the show, you can call our next hotline. That is 814-240-8816. We look forward to hearing from you. Marcus Atkinson. Come back next time and you can hear about what's next for our communities and our democracy. Peace.